You got this. Okay. Good, keep that tempo. Let's try it again.
A little softer on the low notes.
Yes, that's much better. Well done.
The small town was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone. People greeted each other on the streets. Shop owners remembered their customers by name, and news traveled quickly from one end of town to the other. It was peaceful, predictable, and comfortable. For most people, that was enough. But for one young woman, there was always a dream quietly living inside her heart. She had never been the type of person who enjoyed attention. While others loved being in the spotlight, she preferred staying in the background. At school, she rarely raised her hand. At community events, she usually sat in the last row. Even among friends, she often listened more than she spoke. Many people thought she lacked confidence. Some believed she was simply too quiet. The truth was more complicated. She carried a deep love for music, but she feared what others might think of her. Her love for music had started many years earlier when she was a little girl. Her grandmother owned an old piano that stood in the corner of a small living room. The piano was far from perfect. A few keys were worn down and it needed tuning more often than not. But to her, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Every weekend, she would sit beside her grandmother and watch her fingers move across the keys. The music filled the room with warmth. It seemed to make every problem disappear, even if only for a few minutes. Her grandmother was not a famous musician. She had never performed in large halls or appeared on television. Yet whenever she played, people stopped what they were doing and listened. One afternoon, when she was only 8 years old, she asked her grandmother a question. "How do you make the music sound so beautiful?" Her grandmother smiled and gently touched her shoulder. "It's not about playing fast," she said. "It's not about showing off. Music becomes beautiful when it comes from the heart." Those words stayed with her for years. As she grew older, she spent countless hours practicing. While other children played outside, she often sat at the piano. She learned melodies, practiced scales, and slowly improved her skills. Still, she never thought of herself as extraordinary. Whenever someone praised her playing, she would quickly change the subject. Whenever people suggested she perform in public, she politely refused. The idea of standing on a stage terrified her. After finishing school, life became busy. She found work at a local bookstore. The job paid the bills and kept her occupied. Most days followed the same routine. She opened the store in the morning. She helped customers find books. She organized shelves. She closed the store in the evening. Then she went home and played the piano. Music remained her private escape from the world. Years passed this way. Many people around her had no idea how talented she was. Only a small group of close friends had ever heard her play. Whenever they listened, they always reacted the same way. "You should perform somewhere. You're too good to keep hiding. People need to hear this." She always laughed and shook her head. No, they don't. But deep inside, she wondered if they were right. One rainy afternoon, everything began to change. She was sitting behind the bookstore counter when she noticed a colorful poster hanging on a nearby notice board. At first, she paid little attention to it. Then a few words caught her eye. "Local music showcase." Her curiosity grew. She walked closer and began reading. The event would bring together musicians from different towns. Performers would have the opportunity to play before experienced judges and a large audience. Winners would receive recognition and opportunities to perform at future events. She read the poster twice. Then a third time, a strange feeling appeared inside her. Excitement, but it was quickly followed by fear. She knew exactly what her friends would say. They would tell her to enter. That evening, she met two friends at a small cafe. As expected, they immediately noticed she seemed distracted. "What's on your mind?" one of them asked. She hesitated. Then she mentioned the music showcase. The reaction was immediate. "You have to do it." She laughed nervously. "No chance." "Why not?" "Because there will be people who are much better than me." "That doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Her friends exchanged looks. Then one of them leaned forward. You've spent years doubting yourself. I'm being realistic. No, her friend replied. You're being afraid. The words hit harder than expected. For a moment, nobody spoke. Deep down, she knew her friend was right. Fear had influenced many decisions in her life. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of being judged. Fear of failing. The conversation stayed with her long after she returned home. That night, she sat in front of her piano. Her fingers rested on the keys. The room was silent. She thought about the competition. She thought about standing on a stage. She thought about people watching her. The idea still frightened her. Then she remembered her grandmother. More specifically, she remembered something her grandmother once said. Regret is heavier than fear. At the time, she had not fully understood those words. Now they felt different. What if she never tried? What if years later she looked back and wished she had taken the chance? The thought bothered her. Over the next several days, she continued thinking about the showcase. At work, at home, during meals, the idea refused to leave her mind. Finally, on the last day for applications, she made a decision. Her hands trembled slightly as she filled out the form online. Several times she almost closed the page. Several times she nearly changed her mind. But eventually she pressed the submit button. The application was sent. The moment it was done, her heart started racing. She stared at the screen. There was no taking it back now. Part of her felt excited. Another part immediately wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The following week felt unusually long. Every time her phone buzzed, she checked it. Every email notification made her nervous. Then one afternoon, while organizing books at work, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. An email had arrived. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Her hands suddenly felt cold. Slowly, she opened the message. Her eyes moved across the words. Then she read the sentence that changed everything. She had been accepted. For a moment, she could hardly believe it. A mixture of happiness and panic rushed through her at the same time. She wanted to celebrate. She also wanted to hide. When she told her friends later that evening, they were thrilled. They congratulated her, hugged her, and immediately started discussing preparations. She smiled, but inside she remained nervous. The showcase was now real. There would be no avoiding it. Over the following weeks, she practiced every day. She carefully selected the piece she wanted to perform. Unlike many musicians who chose complicated compositions filled with difficult techniques, she picked a simple melody. It was not flashy. It was not dramatic, but it meant something to her. The song reminded her of childhood afternoons with her grandmother. Every note carried a memory. Every section told a story. As the event approached, her confidence rose and fell constantly. Some days she felt ready. Other days she felt completely unprepared. Yet she continued practicing. One evening, she finally packed her music sheets into a small bag. The showcase would begin the next morning. She barely slept that night. When dawn arrived, she got dressed, took a deep breath, and left home. The venue was located in a nearby city. As she approached the building, her stomach tightened. Large banners hung outside. Performers and visitors moved through the entrance. The place felt much bigger than she had imagined. She paused near the doorway. For a brief moment, fear returned stronger than ever. She could still walk away. Nobody would stop her. Nobody would know. But then she remembered why she had come. Slowly, she straightened her shoulders. She tightened her grip on her bag. Then she stepped through the entrance and into the building, unaware that the next few days would completely change her life. The moment she stepped inside the venue, she felt as if she had entered a completely different world. The building was much larger than she had imagined. Bright lights hung from the ceiling. Staff members moved quickly from one area to another. Musicians carried instrument cases through long hallways. Everywhere she looked, people seemed confident and experienced. For a second, she wondered if she truly belonged there. She tightened her grip on her bag and quietly followed the signs leading to the registration desk. After checking in, she received a participant badge and a schedule for the next 2 days. The competition would begin the following morning, but contestants had access to rehearsal rooms that afternoon. She thanked the volunteer and walked toward the practice area. As she entered one of the halls, she immediately noticed the difference between herself and many of the other performers. Some wore expensive clothes and spoke confidently about previous competitions. Others discussed music schools, professional instructors, and years of advanced training. Several musicians were practicing difficult pieces that sounded incredibly impressive. Fast notes filled the room. Complex melodies echoed through the hall. People occasionally stopped to listen and applaud one another. She quietly found an empty chair near the corner and sat down. The more she observed, the smaller she felt. A young performer nearby finished playing a dramatic piece and received compliments from several contestants. "That was amazing. You'll definitely make the finals. Those techniques were incredible." The performer smiled proudly. Meanwhile, she remained silent. No one paid attention to her. Part of her was relieved. Another part felt invisible. She reminded herself that she wasn't there to compete with everyone else. She was there because she loved music. Still, it was difficult not to compare herself. After a while, she found an available piano in a smaller rehearsal room. The room was quiet and peaceful. Finally alone, she sat down and began playing her chosen melody. The familiar notes immediately calmed her nerves. The piece wasn't complicated. It didn't contain flashy techniques or dramatic transitions. It was simple, gentle, honest. Each note reminded her why she loved music in the first place. For a few minutes, she forgot about the competition. She forgot about the audience. She forgot about the judges. It was just her and the piano. But then the door opened. A few contestants entered the room. They were searching for a place to practice. When they heard her playing, they paused. At first, they listened quietly. Then one of them exchanged a glance with another. The melody ended. The room fell silent. One contestant spoke first. "Is that the piece you're performing tomorrow?" She looked up and nodded. "Yes." The group seemed surprised. One of them laughed softly. "Really?" She wasn't sure how to respond. Another contestant shrugged. "It sounds nice, but it's pretty basic for a competition like this." The comment wasn't shouted. It wasn't cruel, but it still hurt. She forced a small smile. "I know it's simple." Another contestant leaned against the wall. "You should probably choose something more challenging. This competition is full of strong musicians. Judges usually want something impressive." The words were delivered casually, almost as advice. Yet every sentence chipped away at her confidence. She thanked them politely and continued practicing after they left. But something had changed. The melody no longer felt as comforting. For the first time, she began questioning her choice. Maybe they were right. Maybe her piece was too simple. Maybe she should have selected something more difficult. The doubts followed her throughout the afternoon. Later that day, contestants gathered in a common lounge area. People introduced themselves and shared stories about their musical backgrounds. She mostly listened. As conversations continued, she learned that many participants had years of professional training. Some had performed nationally. Others had won previous competitions. Every new story made her feel more inexperienced. Eventually, someone asked about her musical background. She hesitated. Then she explained that she had learned from her grandmother and mostly practiced on her own. The reaction was polite but brief. The conversation quickly moved on. Nobody seemed particularly interested. She wasn't offended. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was different from everyone else. That evening, she returned to her hotel room feeling exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. She sat by the window and stared at the city lights outside. The excitement she had felt when receiving her acceptance letter seemed far away now. Doubt had taken its place. Her phone buzzed. A message from one of her friends appeared. "How's everything going?" She stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. "Good. Just nervous." The response came almost immediately. "That's normal. You've got this." She smiled slightly. Then another message appeared. "Remember why you started." Those 4 words stayed with her. Remember why you started. She placed the phone down and looked across the room. In her mind, she could almost see her grandmother sitting beside that old piano again. She remembered the countless afternoons they spent together. She remembered every lesson, every conversation, every piece of encouragement. Most importantly, she remembered one thing her grandmother often repeated. People don't always remember perfect notes. They remember how the music made them feel. Back then, she never fully understood the meaning. Now she thought about it carefully. The contestants she had met were talented. Very talented. There was no denying that. But she wasn't trying to be them. She wasn't trying to copy their style. The piece she had chosen represented something personal. Something real. Yet despite these thoughts, uncertainty remained. The next morning arrived faster than expected. Contestants gathered early at the venue. The official rehearsals would take place before the competition began. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed many performers warming up. Some practiced scales. Others reviewed difficult sections of their pieces. Everyone seemed focused. Everyone seemed prepared. She wished she felt the same. When her rehearsal time arrived, she walked onto the stage for the first time. The sight immediately stole her breath. Rows upon rows of empty seats stretched before her. Even without an audience, the room felt enormous. She sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, her fingers refused to move. The pressure felt overwhelming. Eventually, she began playing. The melody flowed smoothly. The notes sounded clear. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about the comments she had heard the day before. Basic. Simple. Not impressive enough. The words repeated themselves in her mind. When rehearsal ended, she left the stage feeling more uncertain than ever. As the day continued, she overheard other contestants discussing performances. Several mentioned difficult compositions. Others talked about complex techniques. The conversations only increased her anxiety. By lunchtime, she found herself sitting alone. Her appetite had disappeared. She barely touched her food. Instead, she stared at her performance schedule. Her name was listed among the competitors. One simple line on a piece of paper. She wondered whether she should withdraw. The thought shocked her. Just a few weeks earlier, she had been excited to receive acceptance into the competition. Now she was considering leaving before it even began. The idea seemed tempting. If she left, she wouldn't risk embarrassment. She wouldn't face criticism. She wouldn't have to stand on that stage. The more she thought about it, the easier it seemed. Nobody was forcing her to stay. She could simply go home. No one would stop her. No one would know how close she came to performing. For nearly an hour, she seriously considered it. Then something unexpected happened. While walking through a quiet hallway, she heard faint piano music coming from an empty room. Curious, she stepped closer. Inside, an older staff member was playing. The melody wasn't complicated. In fact, it was incredibly simple. Yet there was something beautiful about it. She listened quietly from the doorway. When the music ended, the staff member noticed her. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." The older woman smiled. "You weren't interrupting." For a moment, neither spoke. Then the woman asked a simple question. "You're one of the contestants, aren't you?" She nodded. Nervous. A small laugh escaped. "Very." The woman smiled knowingly. "Most people are." She hesitated before speaking again. "What if my piece isn't good enough?" The woman thought for a second. Then she replied, "Music isn't a contest about who can play the most notes. It's about connection." The words immediately reminded her of her grandmother. Almost the exact same lesson. The woman stood and prepared to leave. Before walking away, she added one final sentence. "Play the piece that means something to you." Then she disappeared down the hallway. For several moments, she remained standing there. Something inside her began to settle. The fear hadn't disappeared completely, but her perspective was changing. Maybe she didn't need to impress everyone. Maybe she simply needed to be herself. That evening, as contestants made their final preparations, she returned to the piano one last time. She played her melody slowly, carefully. This time she focused on the feeling behind every note. Not the competition, not the judges, not the opinions of others, just the music. When she finished, she took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be the biggest challenge of her life. She was still afraid, but for the first time since arriving at the venue, she was certain of one thing. No matter what happened, she would walk onto that stage and play the piece she loved. Competition day arrived with a feeling she could not fully explain. The moment she opened her eyes that morning, she remembered where she was and why she had come. Her heart immediately began beating faster. For a few seconds, she simply stared at the ceiling of her hotel room. Today was the day. The thought alone made her nervous. She slowly got out of bed and walked toward the window. The city was already awake. Cars moved through the streets below. People hurried toward work. Everything seemed normal. Yet for her, this day felt different from any other. She got dressed, ate a light breakfast, and tried to calm herself. But no matter what she did, the nervous feeling remained. As she headed toward the venue, she kept repeating the same words in her mind. One step at a time. One step at a time. When she arrived, the building was already full of activity. Contestants walked through the hallways carrying instruments and music sheets. Volunteers directed guests toward the auditorium. Staff members checked equipment and prepared the stage. The atmosphere felt exciting and intimidating. Everyone seemed focused. Everyone seemed ready. She wasn't sure she felt either of those things. After checking in, she found a quiet corner and sat down. The competition would begin in less than an hour. She looked at the program schedule again. Her performance was listed near the middle of the event. At first, she had been happy about that. Now she wasn't so sure. The longer she waited, the more time she would have to worry. Soon the auditorium doors opened. Contestants began taking their seats backstage while audience members entered from the front. The crowd was much larger than she expected. Families, friends, music lovers, local reporters, and judges filled the hall. The sight made her stomach tighten. She had never performed in front of so many people. As the opening announcements began, she sat quietly backstage. The first contestant was called. A wave of applause followed. Then the performance started. The musician played an energetic and technically difficult piece that immediately impressed the audience. When it ended, loud applause filled the room. The judges smiled and took notes. The contestant left the stage looking confident. Then another performer followed. And another. Each performance seemed bigger than the last. Fast fingers, complex arrangements, dramatic endings. The audience loved them. Every round of applause made her feel more nervous. She tried not to compare herself to the others, but it was impossible. She listened carefully as each musician performed. Many were genuinely talented. Some had skills she could only admire. The more she watched, the more she questioned herself. What was she doing here? Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe she wasn't ready for this level of competition. The doubts that had followed her throughout the previous days returned stronger than ever. A contestant sitting nearby seemed to notice her anxiety. "You look worried." She forced a smile. "A little." "A little?" The contestant laughed. "You look terrified." She laughed softly. "Maybe that's true." The contestant shrugged confidently. "I'm nervous too, but that's normal." Then he glanced at the performance list. When he saw the title of her piece, his expression changed slightly. "That's what you're playing?" She nodded. The contestant looked surprised. Interesting choice. Something about his tone made her uneasy. "What do you mean?" "It's just very simple." There was that word again. Simple. She had heard it repeatedly since arriving. The contestant wasn't trying to be rude. Still, his next comment stung. "I don't think the judges usually reward simple pieces." He stood and walked away before she could respond. She looked down at the program in her hands. The words blurred slightly. Simple. Basic. Not impressive. The comments continued echoing inside her head. As the performances continued, her confidence slowly faded. At one point, she even considered leaving her seat and walking out of the building. The thought seemed ridiculous, yet it felt tempting. No stage, no pressure, no embarrassment, just a quiet trip home. Nobody would force her to stay. She imagined packing her things and leaving before her name was called. The image felt strangely comforting. But another thought immediately followed. If she left now, she would never know what might have happened. The regret would stay with her much longer than today's fear. She took a deep breath. Then another. And another. The competition moved forward. Time passed faster than expected. Eventually, only a few performers remained before her turn. Her heart began racing. She could hear every beat. One of the event volunteers approached. "You're up soon." The words felt unreal. She nodded quietly. The volunteer smiled. "Good luck." As the next contestant took the stage, she moved closer to the waiting area. From there, she could see part of the audience. Hundreds of faces. Rows and rows of people. The sight made her palms sweat. She closed her eyes for a moment. Suddenly she remembered sitting beside her grandmother years ago. She remembered the old piano, the worn keys, the warm smile, the feeling of safety she always felt during those afternoons. Those memories helped calm her slightly. A loud round of applause brought her attention back to the present. The latest performer had finished. The audience seemed impressed. The contestant returned backstage smiling proudly. Now only one performer remained before her. She felt as if time had slowed down. Every minute seemed longer than usual. The final contestant before her delivered an energetic performance that received one of the loudest reactions of the day. The audience stood and applauded. Several judges smiled broadly. Backstage, people whispered about how strong the performance had been. Her nervousness grew. How could she possibly follow that? She stared at the floor. For a brief moment, fear completely took over. She couldn't do it. Her legs felt weak. Her hands felt cold. Her mind was filled with doubt. She imagined walking onto the stage and disappointing everyone. She imagined forgetting the notes. She imagined the audience losing interest. The images seemed so real. She stepped away from the waiting area and walked toward a nearby hallway. She needed a moment alone. The sounds of applause faded behind her. For several minutes she stood there quietly. Part of her wanted to leave. The urge was stronger now than ever before. One decision, one exit door, and everything would be over. As she stood there, someone approached. It was one of the stage crew members she had seen earlier during rehearsals. The woman carried a headset and several papers. She noticed the nervous expression immediately. "Big moment." She laughed weakly. "You could say that." The crew member smiled. "I've worked at these events for years." "Then you've probably seen performers much better than me." The woman shook her head. "That's not what I was going to say." She seemed curious. "What were you going to say?" The woman thought for a second. "I've seen hundreds of performers. And the ones who connect with people are rarely the ones trying hardest to impress them." The words caught her attention. The crew member continued. "Audiences can feel when someone is genuine." For a moment neither spoke. Then the woman smiled warmly. "Trust your music." Simple advice. Yet somehow it mattered. The crew member eventually returned to work. But the conversation stayed with her. She stood alone in the hallway for another minute. Then she looked toward the auditorium entrance. She knew she had a choice. She could leave, or she could face her fear. Slowly, she straightened her shoulders. The decision became clear. She had come too far to quit now. She walked back toward the stage area. At that exact moment, applause erupted from inside the auditorium. The performer before her had finished. A volunteer immediately approached. "Please get ready." Her pulse quickened again. This was it. There would be no more waiting, no more rehearsing, no more second-guessing. The moment had arrived. She moved toward the side of the stage. The announcer stepped forward and addressed the audience. The hall gradually became quiet. She stood behind the curtain holding her music sheets. Her hands trembled slightly. The announcer began introducing the next performer. Her performer number, her hometown, her name. As the introduction continued, she felt as though everything around her had become distant. The sounds seemed muted. The lights seemed brighter. Her heart seemed louder. Then the final words came. "Please welcome our next performer." Applause echoed through the auditorium. The curtain opened. For one brief second, she froze. Hundreds of faces looked toward the stage. The piano waited under the spotlight. Every fear she had battled over the past few days returned at once. But something else appeared too. Determination. She remembered every hour spent practicing, every encouraging message from friends, every lesson from her grandmother, every reason she had chosen this melody. Slowly, she stepped forward. One step, then another. The audience watched quietly. She reached the piano bench and sat down. The hall felt enormous. The silence felt endless. She placed her hands above the keys. For a moment, she simply sat there, breathing, listening, gathering courage. The judges watched attentively. The audience waited. No one knew what was about to happen, not even her. Then she took one final breath, lowered her fingers toward the piano, and prepared to play the first note. Her fingers touched the keys. The first note filled the auditorium. It was soft, simple, gentle. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the audience, not the judges, not the competition, just the music. The opening notes floated through the room with a calmness she had not expected to feel. Only seconds earlier, her heart had been racing. Fear had almost stopped her from stepping onto the stage. But now something was changing. The moment she began playing, the nervous thoughts slowly faded. The melody was familiar. She had played it hundreds of times, sometimes after work, sometimes late at night, sometimes on difficult days when music was the only thing that helped her clear her mind. Every note carried a memory. Every phrase felt personal. At first, the audience listened politely. Some people sat back in their seats. A few judges quietly took notes. The atmosphere was respectful, but not especially emotional. Many people were still thinking about the powerful performances they had already heard earlier. Several contestants backstage watched through the side curtains. Some recognized the melody immediately. Others simply listened. One contestant quietly whispered to another, "This is the simple piece?" The other nodded. Neither seemed particularly impressed. The performance continued. The melody remained calm and uncomplicated. No dramatic movements. No flashy techniques. No attempt to show off. Just music. For a few moments, it seemed as though nothing unusual would happen. Then slowly, something began to change. It started with the audience. A woman in the third row leaned forward slightly. An older man who had been glancing at the program stopped reading and looked toward the stage. Several people who had been shifting in their seats became still. The melody itself had not changed, but the feeling behind it was becoming impossible to ignore. She wasn't simply playing notes. She was telling a story. Without speaking a single word, she was sharing memories, emotions, and experiences through the piano, and people were beginning to feel it. As she continued, her confidence grew. The fear that had followed her for days seemed to disappear. She no longer worried about competing against anyone. She no longer thought about the comments she had heard. The voices that had called her piece simple became distant memories. Her entire focus remained on the music. The judges noticed the change too. One judge looked up from a notebook. Another folded his hands and listened more carefully. A third judge stopped writing altogether. Their attention was now fully on the stage. Backstage, several contestants exchanged curious looks. They couldn't explain exactly why. Technically, the piece remained simple. Yet it was becoming difficult to look away. The audience felt connected to it. And that connection was growing stronger with every passing minute. She continued playing. The melody gently moved through different emotions. Moments of hope. Moments of reflection. Moments of quiet joy. Nothing felt forced. Everything felt natural. People in the audience began relating the music to their own memories. One person remembered childhood. Another thought about family gatherings. Someone else remembered a loved one who had always encouraged them. The remarkable thing was that she knew none of this was happening. She simply played. The audience created their own stories through the music. That is what made the moment powerful. Several rows back, a young girl sat beside her parents. She had attended the event because she loved music. Unlike many others, she wasn't analyzing technique or difficulty. She was simply listening. As the melody continued, she smiled. Her mother noticed. "Do you like this one?" she whispered. The girl nodded. "It feels happy." A few seats away, an older couple held hands quietly. Neither spoke. They simply listened. The performance was reaching people in different ways. And with each passing minute, the atmosphere inside the auditorium changed. The room grew quieter. Not because people were losing interest, because they were becoming more focused. Even the small background noises began to disappear. Programs stopped rustling. Whispers faded. People listened, truly listened. On stage, she barely noticed any of it. She was no longer performing for approval. She was playing from the heart, exactly as her grandmother had taught her years earlier. A memory suddenly entered her mind. She remembered being 8 years old. She remembered sitting beside that old piano. She remembered asking how music could sound beautiful. And she remembered the answer. Music becomes beautiful when it comes from the heart. The memory brought a small smile to her face. Her fingers continued moving across the keys. The melody reached its emotional center. The notes became slightly stronger. Not louder, just more confident. For the first time all day, she felt completely comfortable on stage. It was as though she had forgotten the audience existed. The judges noticed that too. One of them leaned toward another and quietly said something. The second judge nodded. Neither took their eyes off the stage. Backstage, the contestants who had doubted her earlier now looked uncertain. The comments they had made no longer seemed as convincing. One performer crossed his arms and continued watching. Another shook her head slightly. "I didn't expect this." Neither had an explanation. The music wasn't difficult. Yet somehow it had become one of the most memorable performances of the day. As the final section approached, the atmosphere inside the hall became almost magical. Not because of special effects, not because of dramatic stage lighting, because everyone felt connected to the same moment. The audience had stopped comparing performances. They had stopped thinking about rankings and scores. For those few minutes, they were simply experiencing the music. That kind of connection is rare, and everyone in the room could feel it. She reached the final passage. The melody softened again. The notes became quieter, more delicate. The room remained completely silent. No coughs, no whispers, no movement, just music. The silence itself seemed to prove how deeply people were listening. Even backstage, contestants stood motionless. The judges remained focused. The audience hardly blinked. One final sequence of notes flowed through the hall. Then another. Then another. The ending approached. She felt it. The audience felt it too. The final moments arrived gently. No dramatic finish. No explosive ending. Just honesty. Just emotion. Just a simple melody played with sincerity. Her fingers touched the final notes. The sound slowly faded into the auditorium. And then, nothing. Complete silence. For one brief moment, the entire hall remained perfectly still. She sat quietly at the piano. Her hands rested near the keys. The last note disappeared. Yet nobody moved. The silence lasted only a few seconds. But it felt much longer. She looked up slightly. For a moment, she worried something had gone wrong. Had they disliked it? Had the performance failed? The thought barely had time to form. Suddenly, applause exploded throughout the auditorium. The sound was overwhelming. People stood from their seats. Rows of audience members rose one after another. The applause grew louder, and louder, and louder. She stared in disbelief. A standing ovation. Her eyes widened. She had never experienced anything like it. Not even close. The audience continued clapping. Many people were smiling. Some looked emotional. Others simply seemed amazed. The judges applauded as well. Several contestants backstage joined in. Even those who had questioned her piece earlier. She couldn't fully process what was happening. Only minutes earlier she had doubted herself. Now hundreds of people were on their feet. The noise filled the entire hall. For a moment, she thought about her grandmother. How badly she wished she could share this moment. A lump formed in her throat. She blinked several times. The applause continued. One of the judges stood and smiled warmly. Several audience members shouted words of encouragement. The reaction felt unreal. Eventually, she rose from the piano bench. The audience applauded even louder. She bowed politely. Then she bowed again. The standing ovation continued. Her hands trembled slightly. This time not because of fear, because of emotion. For years she had hidden her talent. For years she had doubted herself. For years she believed she wasn't good enough. Yet somehow, the simple melody she almost abandoned had connected with an entire room full of strangers. At that moment, she finally understood something important. People had not fallen in love with the complexity of the music. They had connected with its honesty. And honesty was something no competition score could measure. As the applause slowly began to settle, she prepared to leave the stage. But before she walked away, she glanced one final time at the audience. Hundreds of faces looked back at her, smiling, applauding, cheering. The same stage that had terrified her only minutes earlier now felt completely different. She stepped away from the piano and walked toward the backstage area. The applause followed her all the way to the curtain, and as she disappeared behind it, she had no idea that the biggest surprises of the day were still waiting for her. The applause was still echoing through the auditorium when she stepped backstage. For a moment, she simply stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. Everything felt unreal. Only an hour earlier, she had been sitting alone, wondering if she should leave the competition before her name was called. Now people were standing and applauding because of the very performance she had almost abandoned. She slowly walked away from the stage entrance. Her hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear this time, from emotion. Several contestants stood nearby. Some smiled as she passed. Others looked surprised. A few seemed completely speechless. One performer who had previously questioned her choice of music approached her first. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled awkwardly. "I owe you an apology." She looked surprised. "What for?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I judged your piece before I heard it." She didn't know what to say. The contestant continued. "I thought simple meant weak." He laughed softly. "I was wrong." His honesty caught her off guard. She smiled. "Thank you." The conversation was brief, but it meant a lot. Over the previous days, she had heard many opinions about her music. Most people focused on what her performance lacked. Very few understood what it contained. Now things were different. As more contestants came backstage, several stopped to congratulate her. Some praised her confidence. Others praised her connection with the audience. One performer shook her head and laughed. "I still can't believe that reaction." Neither could she. A volunteer soon appeared and informed the contestants that the judges would meet before announcing results. The waiting period began. Contestants gathered in different areas of the venue. Some chatted. Some reviewed their performances. Others simply waited quietly. She found an empty chair near a window and sat down. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to relax. Win or lose, something important had already happened. She had faced her fear. That alone felt like a victory. As she sat there, her phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages poured in from friends. One after another. "How did it go? Did you perform yet? We're thinking about you." A few minutes later, another message arrived. Then another. And another. She opened one of them. A friend had sent a link. Confused, she clicked it. A video appeared. It was her performance. Someone in the audience had recorded part of it and uploaded it online. The clip had only been posted recently. Yet hundreds of people had already viewed it. She stared at the screen. That number continued growing every few seconds. The realization felt strange. People she had never met were watching her play. She immediately closed the phone. It was too much to process. A short time later, Event staff invited contestants back into the auditorium. The judges were ready to speak. Everyone returned to their seats. The atmosphere felt tense. Even the most confident performers appeared nervous. The head judge stepped onto the stage. The audience became quiet. He thanked everyone for attending and praised the overall quality of the competition. Then he began discussing the performances. He spoke about technical skill, creativity, dedication, practice, all the qualities musicians work hard to develop. Contestants listened carefully. Then the judge said something unexpected. Today we witnessed many impressive performances. The audience applauded. He smiled and continued. But one performance reminded us of something important. The room became quiet again. The judge paused briefly. Music is not only about difficulty. It is about connection. Several contestants exchanged looks. The judge continued. A simple melody, when played with honesty and emotion, can leave a lasting impact. The audience immediately understood who he was talking about. A wave of applause filled the room. She felt her face grow warm. The judge wasn't discussing scores. He wasn't announcing winners. Yet somehow his words felt incredibly meaningful. Another judge spoke next. She described how certain performances demonstrated extraordinary technique. Then she mentioned something else. One performer transformed a quiet melody into a shared experience. Again, the audience applauded. She lowered her eyes, feeling both grateful and embarrassed by the attention. The judges eventually announced awards. Several contestants received recognition for different categories: outstanding technique, creative arrangement, stage presence, audience choice. Each award was met with applause. When her name was finally called, she froze. For a moment she wondered if she had heard correctly. The audience immediately began clapping. She slowly stood and walked toward the stage. The applause continued. The judges presented her with a special recognition award for emotional performance and audience connection. The title itself surprised her. She accepted the award with a nervous smile. As she stood beside the judges, she looked out across the audience. This time the stage felt completely different. Not because she had become fearless, but because she finally understood something. The audience wasn't waiting for perfection. They were simply responding to something real. After the ceremony ended, people gathered throughout the venue. Families took photographs. Contestants congratulated one another. Judges spoke with performers. The atmosphere felt relaxed and cheerful. As she made her way through the crowd, several audience members approached. One older woman thanked her. "Your performance reminded me of my mother." The woman smiled warmly. "She used to play piano when I was young." Another audience member shared a similar story. A man explained that the melody had reminded him of childhood memories. Someone else simply said, "Your music made me smile." These conversations affected her more than any award. For years she had believed that technical perfection was the most important part of performing. Now she was discovering another truth. People remembered feelings. People remembered connection. That realization changed everything. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing near the venue entrance. She needed a few moments away from the crowd. The day had been overwhelming, in the best possible way. As she stood there, she noticed several contestants walking toward her. Among them were two of the performers who had questioned her music earlier. For a second, she wasn't sure what to expect. One of them smiled first. "We wanted to say congratulations." "Thank you." The performer nodded. "You taught us something today." She looked surprised. "What do you mean?" The contestant laughed softly. "We spend so much time trying to impress people that sometimes we forget why music exists." The others agreed. Their words felt sincere. No bitterness, no jealousy, just respect. The conversation lasted several minutes. When it ended, everyone walked away smiling. The experience left a strong impression on her. The competition had started with comparisons and doubt. Now it was ending with understanding. As evening approached, she returned to her hotel room. The day finally began catching up with her. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the award resting on the nearby table. it still felt strange. Not long ago she had considered withdrawing from the competition. Now she was carrying home an award and memories she would never forget. Her phone buzzed again. More messages. More congratulations. More people sharing the video of her performance. She finally opened the link again. The view count had increased dramatically. Comments appeared beneath the video. Most came from strangers. Yet many expressed similar thoughts. Beautiful. Heartfelt. Honest. Emotional. She read a few comments before putting the phone down. The attention still felt unfamiliar, but she appreciated the kindness. As the evening grew quieter, she thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the doubt, the criticism, the standing ovation, the conversations, the recognition. Each moment seemed connected somehow. If she had listened to fear, none of it would have happened. If she had changed her piece simply to satisfy others, the result might have been completely different. The realization brought a smile to her face. For years she had hidden her talent because she worried about what people might think. Today she learned that being herself was enough. More than enough. Before going to sleep, she sat beside the hotel room window and looked out at the city lights. The competition was over, but somehow it felt like something new was beginning. She didn't know exactly what the future would bring. She didn't know whether new opportunities would appear. She didn't know whether people would remember her performance weeks from now. But she knew one thing with certainty. The shy person who had entered the venue a few days earlier was not the same person sitting there now. Something had changed inside her. Not her talent. That had always been there. What changed was her belief in herself. And as she looked out at the lights stretching across the city, she felt a quiet sense of hope. For the first time in a very long time, she was excited to see what came next. The weeks after the competition passed faster than she expected. At first, life seemed almost normal. She returned home. She went back to work at the bookstore. She organized shelves, greeted customers, and followed the same routine she had known for years. Yet something was different. People had started recognizing her. Not everywhere, not constantly, but often enough to surprise her. A customer would smile and say, "Weren't you the pianist from that competition?" Someone else would mention seeing the video online. Others would stop for a quick conversation about music. Every time it happened, she felt slightly embarrassed. She still wasn't comfortable being the center of attention, but she appreciated the kindness. The performance video continued spreading online. More people watched it every day. Comments arrived from different places. Many shared stories about how the music reminded them of important moments in their lives. Some mentioned family members. Others talked about childhood memories. Several people explained that the performance encouraged them to stop doubting themselves. Reading those messages felt strange. For so long she had believed her music wasn't special enough. Now complete strangers were telling her that it mattered. The realization never stopped amazing her. A month after the competition, an email arrived. She almost ignored it. At first she assumed it was another advertisement or newsletter. Instead, it was an invitation. A community arts center was organizing a music event and wanted her to perform. She read the message twice. Then a third time. The invitation felt exciting and terrifying. Part of her immediately wanted to decline. Standing on stage had become easier than before, but it still made her nervous. Another part of her remembered everything she had learned during the competition. Growth only happened when she stepped outside her comfort zone. After thinking carefully, she accepted. The event took place several weeks later. Unlike the competition, the atmosphere was relaxed and welcoming. Families filled the audience. Children ran through the hall before the show began. People chatted and laughed. The pressure felt much lower. Still, she felt nervous as she waited backstage. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Just before her performance began, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she walked onto the stage. Something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, she felt gratitude. The audience wasn't there to judge her. They were there to listen. That simple realization changed everything. She played with confidence. The performance went well. When it ended, the audience applauded warmly. The experience reminded her why she loved music in the first place. It wasn't about awards. It wasn't about recognition. It was about sharing something meaningful. As the months passed, more invitations arrived. Some were small local events. Others were larger community programs. She accepted only the opportunities that felt right. She never wanted music to become something stressful. She wanted to enjoy it. And for the first time in years, she truly did. One afternoon, while organizing books at work, she received another unexpected phone call. The caller represented a regional music showcase. Several judges from the competition had recommended her. They wanted her to perform at an upcoming event. For a moment, she thought someone was joking, but the invitation was real. After the call ended, she sat quietly behind the counter. A customer eventually approached. "Everything okay?" She smiled. "Better than okay." The customer smiled back. "That's good to hear." As exciting as these opportunities were, she remained grounded. Her friends noticed that she hadn't changed. She was still the same person, still humble, still kind, still happiest when sitting at a piano. One evening, she visited her grandmother's old house. The house now belonged to another family, but they had preserved many original features. Through a family connection, she received permission to visit briefly. The moment she stepped inside, memories returned. Every room felt familiar. Every corner carried a story. Eventually, she reached the room where the old piano once stood. The piano itself was gone, but she could still picture it perfectly. She stood there quietly for several minutes, thinking, remembering, smiling. So much of her journey had started in that room. The lessons, the encouragement, the belief. Without those moments, she never would have entered the competition. Without her grandmother's guidance, she might never have discovered her own strength. As she prepared to leave, she whispered a simple thank you. No one heard it, but she meant every word. A few months later, she received an invitation that meant more than any previous opportunity. A charity concert was being organized to support music education programs for children. The organizers wanted her to perform as one of the featured musicians. She accepted immediately. The cause felt important. The event attracted a large audience. Teachers, parents, students, community leaders, music lovers. The concert hall was nearly full. As she prepared backstage, she felt a familiar nervousness. Not because she doubted herself, because she wanted the performance to matter. She wanted people to leave feeling inspired. Just before going on stage, she thought about the competition once again. She remembered sitting alone and questioning whether she belonged. She remembered the criticism, the fear, the uncertainty, the standing ovation. Every part of the journey suddenly felt connected. The difficult moments had shaped the meaningful ones. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with calm confidence. The audience welcomed her warmly. She sat at the piano and looked across the room. Hundreds of faces looked back. Years earlier, that sight would have terrified her. Now it simply reminded her of an opportunity to share something she loved. Before beginning, she spoke briefly. Public speaking still wasn't easy for her, but she wanted to say something important. She thanked the organizers. She thanked the audience. Then she spoke about the person who first taught her to love music. Her grandmother. The room became quiet. She explained how a simple piano and a few encouraging words had changed her life. She spoke honestly. Nothing rehearsed. Nothing dramatic. Just gratitude. When she finished speaking, she placed her hands on the keys. Then she began playing. The melody she chose was the same one she had performed at the competition. The same simple piece that people once called too basic. The same piece she had almost abandoned. As the music filled the hall, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing music. And somehow that made the performance stronger than ever. The audience listened carefully. Many recognized the melody. Others were hearing it for the first time. Either way, the reaction was beautiful. When the final note faded, The room became silent. A familiar silence. The kind that appears when people are fully present in a moment. Then applause filled the hall. People stood. They smiled. They cheered. The standing ovation felt wonderful. But this time it wasn't the most important part. The most important part was knowing she had finally become the person she always hoped to be. Not famous. Not perfect. Simply brave enough to share her gift. Later that evening, after the concert ended, she stood outside beneath the night sky. The event staff were cleaning up. Guests were heading home. The city lights glowed in the distance. Everything felt calm. One of the young students who attended the concert approached her. The child looked nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." The student hesitated. "What if I'm not the best musician?" She smiled immediately. The question sounded familiar. Years earlier, she had asked herself something very similar. She thought for a moment before answering. "You don't have to be the best." The student looked confused. "You don't." She shook her head. "No, you just have to be yourself." The child smiled. Those few words seemed to mean something. After the student left, she remained standing there for a while, looking at the stars, thinking about the journey. The shy person who once hid behind fear was gone. Not because fear had disappeared, because she had learned not to let fear decide her future. And perhaps that was the biggest lesson of all. People may doubt you. They may misunderstand you. They may tell you that your gift is too simple. But if you stay true to yourself and continue moving forward, amazing things can happen. As she headed home that night, she felt grateful for every step of the journey, even the difficult ones. Because in the end, the simple tune that others once ridiculed had done something remarkable. It hadn't just ignited a stage. It had helped ignite a new chapter in her life.